Wyoming Territory, September 1877. 6 riders approached Blackstone Ranch through autumn dust, their silhouettes dark against the fading amber sky. The lead horse carried Wade Garrett, a man whose name alone could empty saloons across 4 territories. Wanted for murder, arson, theft. 18 confirmed kills, a reputation built on ashes and blood. His target today was simple: a widow woman, alone on 2,000 prime acres. Easy prey, or so he thought. They couldn't know that the gray-haired woman tending roses in the distance was Sarah McKenna. They couldn't know she'd once been called the Silencer, the fastest gun the Texas Rangers ever had. 38 confirmed kills in 5 brutal years. 15 years retired, but deadly skills don't rust with age. They sharpen, they calcify. They become something more dangerous than youth and speed combined. They become wisdom paired with lethality. By sunset, 3 of those 6 outlaws would be dead. 2 would flee, broken and terrified. 1 would face the hangman's noose, because Sarah McKenna had spent 15 patient years building a life of peace in this harsh Wyoming soil, and she would burn the world down to protect it. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments below. And make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow's story will leave you breathless. Now let's begin. The morning sun stretched long shadows across Blackstone Ranch as Sarah McKenna worked the fence line on the eastern pasture. 52 years old, with silver threading through hair that had once been golden brown. Her hands bore the calluses and scars of hard ranch work, mending wire, checking posts, doing the endless labor that 2,000 acres demanded. She worked alone most days except for Nathaniel Abernathy, her ranch foreman. Folks called him Nate, 68 years old with a salt and pepper beard and one eye missing from his days riding Confederate cavalry. He knew Sarah's secret, had known it from the day she hired him 7 years back. Recognized something in the way she moved, the way her eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. The ranch itself sat in a valley 12 miles north of the town called Blackstone. Population 180 souls, good grazing land, 3 creeks running through her property year-round, 200 head of cattle, enough to live comfortably, enough to be worth killing for if a man had murder in his heart. Sarah paused in her work, wiping sweat from her brow despite the autumn chill. Something felt wrong. A prickling at the base of her skull. The kind of warning that had kept her alive through 5 years of rangering and 15 years of hiding. She scanned the southern horizon. Nothing yet, but something was coming. She could feel it in her bones. By noon, Sarah had ridden into Blackstone for supplies. The town huddled around a single dirt road. General store, saloon, sheriff's office, church, blacksmith. The bare essentials of frontier civilization. She tied her horse outside Prudence Ashford's general store. Prudence was 55, a widow herself with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She ran the store and the town's gossip network with equal efficiency. The bell above the door chimed as Sarah entered. Prudence looked up from her ledger, worry creasing her weathered face. "Sarah, good you're here. Need to tell you something." Sarah set her shopping list on the counter. "What's troubling you, Prudence?" "Wade Garrett's gang. Heard they burned out the Pritchard family up north 3 days back. Killed the parents, left their boy Jake orphaned. He's only 9 years old." Sarah's hands stilled on the counter. Something cold settled in her chest. "Where's the boy now?" "Doc Wheeler took him in temporarily, but Sarah's Sheriff Dalton says there's no proof it was Garrett. Says it could have been accident. Lightning strike, he claims." Sarah knew better. Sheriff Hank Dalton was bought and paid for. Had been for years. A coward with a gut and a badge who looked the other way whenever money crossed his palm. She said nothing, just nodded. Prudence leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Folks are scared, Sarah. 3 homesteads burned in 2 months. Sheriff won't act. We got no law out here except what we make ourselves." Sarah picked up her list again. "I'll take the usual, Prudence. Flour, coffee, sugar, salt." Prudence studied her a moment, then nodded and began gathering supplies. After leaving the store, Sarah rode 5 miles west to a small cabin nestled against a hillside. Smoke rose from the chimney. A single horse grazed in a small corral. This was where Captain Josiah Thornton lived. 70 years old now, white-haired, and walking with an ornate cane from an injury taken in the Indian Wars 20 years past. But his mind remained sharp as broken glass, and his aim nearly as steady as it had been in his prime. He'd been Sarah's captain when she rode with the Texas Rangers, had trained her, shaped her, taught her everything that mattered. Not just how to shoot, though she'd become the finest marksman he'd ever seen, but how to think. How to read men, how to know when violence was necessary and when mercy was stronger. Sarah found him on his porch mending tack. He looked up as she dismounted, his eyes still that piercing blue despite his age. Sarah, coffee's hot. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, drinking bitter coffee from tin cups. The captain had never been one for small talk. He waited. Finally, Sarah spoke. Garrett's gang burned out the Pritchards, killed the parents. Boy's an orphan now. Thornton set down his cup. And Sheriff Dalton calls it accident, lightning strike. Dalton's bought. Has been for years. Thornton studied her face. I see that look in your eyes, Sarah. Trouble brewing. Just thinking. You're thinking about breaking cover. 15 years of peace about to end. Sarah stared into her coffee cup. They're killing families, Captain. Burning out homesteads. And there's no law to stop them. Thornton was quiet a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of memory. You remember what I taught you about other people's fights? You said they stop being other people's fights when children die. I also taught you something else, about the cost. Sarah closed her eyes. She remembered. God, did she remember. The memory came unbidden, sharp as yesterday, despite 15 years of distance. Texas, summer of 1860. She'd been 25 years old, newly sworn as a Texas Ranger, the only woman to ever wear the badge. She'd earned it through pure skill, outgunning every man who challenged her right to wear it. Captain Thornton had taken her to the practice range that first day, set up targets at 20, 50, 100 paces. Miss McKenna, he'd said, formal as always, despite knowing her since she was a girl, you're the finest shot I've trained. Natural talent, quick hands, good eyes. She'd waited for the but speed alone won't keep you alive in what's coming. Then what will Captain? He'd turned to face her fully, those blue eyes boring into hers. Every life you take, justified or not, takes a piece of you, whether you notice it immediately or years later. The piece is always taken. You understand? I understand the law, Captain. I understand justice. Justice and survival aren't always the same thing, Sarah. Remember that. When the time comes. Then I'll make sure each piece is worth it, Captain. His expression had shifted then. Something like sadness, something like pride. That's what I'm afraid of, daughter. That's what I'm afraid of. Sarah opened her eyes back on Thornton's porch in 1877. 15 years older. 15 years of peace behind her. Thornton was watching her, seeing the memory play across her face. You're not that young ranger anymore, Sarah. You're 52. Slower than you were. Sarah met his eyes. No, Captain. I'm 52, which means I'm smarter. A ghost of a smile touched his weathered face. Smarter, yes, but smart enough to know when to walk away. Smart enough to know when I can't. That afternoon, Sarah rode back into Blackstone. The sun hung low, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. She needed to check on young Jake Pritchard, make sure Doc Wheeler had everything he needed to care for the boy. She never made it to the doctor's office. 6 horses stood outside the saloon, dust still settling from their arrival. Sarah recognized the brands. Stolen horses from 3 different territories. The men who rode them didn't care about covering their tracks. She considered riding past, minding her business, keeping her head down like she had for 15 years. Then the saloon doors swung open. 6 men emerged into the fading sunlight. The leader was unmistakable. Wade Garrett, 35 years old with a scarred face and cold eyes the color of creek ice. He wore a black duster despite the warm afternoon because image mattered to men like him. 2 Navy Colts rode his hips, pearl-handled and polished. Behind him came his gang. Silas Cord, called Knife for obvious reasons. The Carson brothers, twins with dead eyes and matching shotguns. Raul Vega, a Mexican gunfighter with more speed than sense. And Kid Dalton, 19 years old and drunk at 4 in the afternoon. The sheriff's nephew, which explained why law never touched this gang. They'd been drinking. Their voices carried loud across the quiet street. Garrett spotted Sarah on her horse loading supplies. He smiled. Not a pleasant expression. Afternoon, ma'am. Sarah didn't look up from securing her pack. Afternoon. Garrett walked closer, thumbs hooked in his belt. His men spread out behind him, a practice formation. You'd be Mrs. McKenna, I'm told, the widow with the fine ranch north of here. Sarah finished tying off her pack. Only then did she turn to face him. Miss, I'm a widow. My condolences, ma'am. Must be hard running all that land alone. I manage. Garrett's smile widened, showing teeth. See, that's what concerns me. Harsh country for a woman alone. Accidents happen out here. Fires, stampedes, all manner of unfortunate events. Sarah met his eyes, held them. Her voice came out flat, empty of emotion. Son, I've survived things that would make you wet yourself. Try me. The smile froze on Garrett's face. Behind him, his men shifted hands, drifting toward weapons. Silas Cord stepped forward, hand on his knife. "Boss, you want me to teach this old woman some manners?" Garrett held up a hand, but his eyes never left Sarah's. "Easy, Silas. Lady's just scared." Natural response. Sarah's expression didn't change. "I'm not scared. I'm warning you." "Warning me of what exactly?" "That every man who's threatened me is either dead or wishing he was." The street had gone very quiet. Shopkeepers frozen in doorways. Pedestrians suddenly finding urgent business elsewhere. Even the horses seemed to sense the tension, ears back, nostrils flaring. Kid Dalton, drunk and stupid, lurched forward. His hand dropped to the revolver at his hip. "You uppity bitch, I'll show you what happens when you talk back to your betters." He started to draw. Sarah's hand moved. It was muscle memory from 2 decades past. Her right hand flashed toward her hip, where a gun hadn't ridden in 15 years. The movement was lightning quick, economical perfect. Every hour of practice, every gunfight, every moment of training crystallized into pure instinct. But she stopped mid-draw, caught herself, her hand hovering empty at her side. The entire saloon porch went absolutely silent, because everyone had seen it. That impossible speed, that practiced ease, the movement of someone who'd drawn a weapon 1,000 times, 10,000 times. Wade Garrett stared at her hand, then at her face. His expression had shifted, the predatory smile replaced by something more cautious. "You've held a gun before, widow." Sarah lowered her hand slowly. "Out here, every woman has, for snakes." She let the word hang there, heavy with meaning. Then she mounted her horse in one smooth motion, despite her age. "Now, if you gentlemen will excuse me, I have a ranch to run." She turned her horse and rode away, calm, controlled, showing no fear and no hurry, but her heart hammered against her ribs. That had been stupid, careless. 15 years of careful anonymity, nearly blown in one moment of reflex. Behind her, she heard Garrett's voice, thoughtful now. "That woman, there's something about her." That night, Sarah sat in her ranch house study with the lamps turned low. The Remington revolvers lay on her desk, cleaned and oiled despite 15 years of disuse. Silver inlaid grips, engraved with a single word on each. The silencer. She hadn't touched them in all those years, kept them locked in a trunk, tried to forget they existed. But old habits died hard, and tonight, with danger circling closer, her hands had found them again. Had pulled them out, had cleaned them with the same methodical care she'd practiced 2 decades ago. Nate knocked softly on the doorframe. "Miss Sarah, everything all right?" She looked up, realized she'd been sitting there for over an hour just staring at the guns. "Garrett's gang is in town." Nate's one good eye narrowed. "I heard. Folks are saying you had words." "Something like that. You planning to do something foolish?" Sarah was quiet a long moment. "Foolish would be letting them keep killing families. Foolish would be breaking cover after 15 years of peace." She met his gaze. "Peace is only worth having if you're willing to defend it, Nate." He studied her, then nodded slowly. "Your father used to say the same thing. Before they killed him." Sarah's hands tightened on the desk edge. Her father, her mother, her 12-year-old brother, all murdered by a gang called the Blackjacks in 1861. She'd been 25 years old, had tracked them for a year, killed every last one, including their leader, Blackjack Malone himself. That had been her 38th and final kill as a Texas Ranger, the one that had broken something inside her, made her realize she'd become the very thing she hunted. Captain Thornton had found her standing over Malone's body, smoking gun in hand, eyes empty. "It's done, Sarah. Justice served." She'd looked at him and he'd seen the truth in her face. "I don't feel justice, Captain. I feel empty." "That's because revenge and justice aren't the same thing. One heals, one hollows." She'd stared at her hands, at the gun, at the blood. "I've killed 38 men in 5 years, all justified, all legal, and I don't recognize myself anymore." Thornton had taken the gun from her gently. "Then it's time to find yourself again. Somewhere quiet, somewhere far from this." So she'd come to Wyoming, changed her name slightly, become just another widow trying to survive. Met George McKenna, a good man who'd owned this ranch. Married him, had 7 peaceful years before his heart gave out one night in his study. Or so everyone said. Heart attack, natural causes. A man of 50, healthy as a horse, one day dead the next. She'd buried him and kept ranching, kept her head down, kept her past locked away. Until tonight. Nate's voice brought her back to the present. "You sure about this, Miss Sarah? Once you step back into that world, it doesn't let go easy." Sarah looked at the guns on her desk, then at her foreman. A 9-year-old boy is orphaned because men like Garrett think they're above law. Someone has to stand. Why does it have to be you? Because I'm the only one who can. The next morning, Sarah rode into town early. She needed to see Doc Malachi Wheeler check on young Jake Pritchard. The doctor's office sat above the general store. She climbed the narrow stairs, knocked softly. "Come in!" Doc Wheeler looked up from his desk. 58 years old with graying temples and the steady hands of a man who'd cut bullets out of more cowboys than he could count. But there was kindness in his eyes, a gentleness that frontier life hadn't managed to kill. "Sarah, good timing. I wanted to talk to you about Jake." The boy sat on a cot in the corner, staring out the window. 9 years old, blonde hair, freckles, eyes that had seen too much too soon. "How's he doing?" Doc Wheeler's expression darkened. "Physically unharmed? Mentally?" He shook his head. "He watched them burn his home, watched his parents die. That kind of thing marks a child." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. Rage, cold and controlled, settling into her bones. "Does he have family, anyone who can take him?" "None close. I'll care for him as long as needed. But Sarah, a doctor's office isn't a home for a boy." She looked at Jake, saw herself at a similar age after violence had torn her world apart. The mirror was uncomfortable. "I'll help however I can, Doc." Before Wheeler could respond, boots thundered on the stairs outside. The door slammed open. Deputy Elijah Sutherland burst in, young and breathless. 24 years old, blonde, with the kind of idealism that frontier law hadn't yet beaten out of him. "Doc, Miss McKenna, it's the Thompson family." Sarah stood. "What about them? Their homestead. It's burning. Right now." They rode hard, Sarah and the deputy and Doc Wheeler, 4 miles west to the Thompson place. But by the time they arrived, there was nothing left to save. The house was a skeleton of flame and smoke. The barn completely collapsed. Livestock scattered or dead. David Thompson stood in his yard, face black with soot, cradling his wife Mary in his arms. Their 2 daughters, ages 6 and 8, clung to their mother's skirts, crying. Sheriff Hank Dalton was already there, sitting on his horse at a safe distance from the flames. 45 years old, gut straining his belt star, riding his chest like an accusation. Deputy Sutherland rode up to him, furious. "Sheriff, this is the 3rd homestead in 2 months. We need to form a posse, track whoever did this." Dalton didn't even look at him. "Could be lightning strike. Dry season. Happens. Lightning, there hasn't been a storm in weeks. Could be careless with a lantern. Sheriff, I found boot prints, horse tracks. 6 riders came through here." Now Dalton did look at him, and his eyes were flat. "Drop it, deputy. Unless you want to lose that badge." The threat hung in the air like the smoke. Sarah dismounted slowly, walked over to where Thompson held his family. "David, you hurt?" He looked up, eyes hollow with shock. "They came at dawn, 6 men. Said we had a week to clear out or they'd be back. Gave us just enough time to get the family out. Then they torched it. You see who led them? Man with a scarred face, black duster, cold eyes. Wade Garrett." Sarah felt that cold rage settle deeper. She turned to where Sheriff Dalton sat his horse. "You going to do anything about this, Sheriff?" Dalton finally met her eyes. "Like I told the deputy, Miss McKenna, no proof of arson. Could be any number of accidents." "Accidents? Like the Pritchards." "Lightning is lightning, and fire is fire, unless it's lit by men on horseback at dawn." Dalton's jaw tightened. "You accusing me of something, ma'am?" "Just wondering how much Wade Garrett pays you to look the other way, Sheriff." The words dropped like stones in still water. Every man present went quiet. Even the flames seemed to hush. Dalton's face flushed red. "That's slander, Miss McKenna. I could arrest you for that." "You could try." Something in her voice made him hesitate. Some edge that promised violence if he pushed. He looked away first. "Mind your business, widow. Before you find yourself in trouble you can't talk your way out of." He turned his horse and rode away. Deputy Sutherland watched him go, then turned to Sarah. "Miss McKenna, can I speak with you privately?" They walked away from the burned homestead, out of earshot. Eli's young face was twisted with frustration and shame. "This isn't right. None of this. Sheriff's on Blackwood's payroll. Whole town knows it." "Blackwood?" Sarah's voice sharpened on the name. "Ezra Blackwood, wealthy rancher east of here, owns half the territory or close to it. Word is he wants a railroad route through these properties. Needs the land. And what Ezra Blackwood wants he gets." Something cold slithered down Sarah's spine at the name. Ezra Blackwood. She knew that name. Knew it from 7 years ago. George had mentioned him. her husband, before he died. "There's a man named Blackwood sniffing around," George had said one night over dinner. "Wants to buy the ranch, offered good money, but I told him this land isn't for sale." 2 months later, George was dead. Heart attack, Doc Wheeler had said. Natural causes. But now, hearing that name again, Sarah's mind turned over possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider. "Miss McKenna," Eli's voice pulled her back. "Deputy, what do you know about my husband's death?" The young man blinked, surprised by the question. "Your husband, George McKenna, that was 7 years back, before my time. But I heard it was natural causes. Heart attack. Who examined the body? Doc Wheeler, I imagine. Why?" Sarah didn't answer. Her mind was racing now, connecting dots that had sat separate for 7 years. "Miss McKenna, I know you keep to yourself, but someone has to stop Garrett's gang. Sheriff won't. Town's too scared. We need help." Sarah looked at the young deputy, saw the idealism, the desperate hope that someone somewhere would stand up. "This isn't your fight, son. It's everyone's fight. They're terrorizing the whole territory." "Then gather the men, form a citizens committee, pressure the territorial governor for a federal marshal. That'll take months. How many more families burn in the meantime?" Sarah had no answer for that. She rode home in silence, mind-churning, arrived at the ranch as the sun touched the western mountains, found Nate waiting on the porch, his expression grim. "What's wrong?" He handed her a piece of paper. A notice nailed to her front door. The words were simple, direct, threatening. "Sell or burn, 1 week, Blackwood." Sarah stared at the paper. "Read it 3 times, then looked up at Nate. "How long has this been here?" "Found it an hour ago, nailed up fresh." She crumpled the paper in her fist. "They came onto my property, my land, left a threat on my door." "Seems that way." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at her foreman. "Nate, get my guns, the Remingtons, the ones in the locked trunk." His one good eye widened. "Miss Sarah, you sure about this? That 9-year-old boy lost his parents. The Thompsons lost their home, and now they're threatening mine. Once you strap those guns on again, there's no going back." Sarah met his gaze, and Nate saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen in 15 years. Something cold and dangerous and absolutely certain. "Then I guess I'm done going back." That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with an unlikely group gathered around her. Nate, Deputy Eli, Doc Wheeler, Prudence Ashford from the general store, and Reverend Silas Matthews, 62 years old, former Union chaplain, who'd seen his share of violence and prayed his share of prayers over dead men. 5 people who knew something had to be done. 5 people who were willing to trust her. Sarah laid the notice on the table. "They've given me a week. Sell or burn." Prudence spoke first, her voice shaking slightly. "Sarah, maybe you should sell. Take the money. Start somewhere else. It's not worth dying for." "It's not about the ranch, Prudence. It's about what comes next. If I sell, they move to the next property, and the next, until they own everything and good people have nowhere left to go." Doc Wheeler leaned forward. "So what are you proposing?" Sarah looked at each of them in turn. "I'm proposing we stand together. Show them that law still means something out here, even if the sheriffs forgot." Eli's young face lit up. "You mean fight them?" "I mean defend. There's a difference." Reverend Matthews cleared his throat. "Sarah, I'm a man of God. I've spoken often about turning the other cheek, but I've also buried too many innocents killed by men like Garrett. So I'll ask you plainly, can you stop them without becoming them?" It was the question Sarah had been asking herself for 15 years. She reached under the table and pulled out a wooden box, set it on the table, opened it. Inside lay 2 Remington 1858 revolvers, silver inlaid, perfectly maintained despite years of disuse. Engraved on the grips, the silencer. Every person at the table sucked in a breath. Eli's voice came out barely a whisper. "No, you're not. You can't be." Sarah met his eyes. "Texas Rangers, 1857 to 1862. 38 confirmed kills. Fastest draw south of the Red River." Doc Wheeler slumped back in his chair. "Sweet, merciful heaven. Sarah McKenna, the silencer. You're supposed to be dead, or myth, or both. I was retired, hiding, building a life of peace." Prudence was staring at the guns like they were snakes. "Then why come back now?" "Because Wade Garrett just made hiding impossible." Sarah closed the box gently. "I need you all to understand something. I'm not that young ranger anymore. I'm 52 years old, slower, but I've learned things in 15 years, things more valuable than speed." Nate spoke up. "Like what?" "Like wisdom. like patience, like knowing when not to draw. My old captain taught me that violence should always be the last resort. But when it becomes necessary, it should be swift, precise, and overwhelming. She looked at Reverend Matthews. You asked if I can stop them without becoming them. I'll offer mercy, every chance I get. But if they refuse, she paused, then I'll do what I was trained to do. The Reverend studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then may God guide your hand, Sarah Donovan. The use of her real name spoken aloud for the first time in 15 years sent a chill through the room. Sarah Donovan, the silencer. Not dead, not myth, just very, very patient. The next morning before dawn, a rider came hard to the ranch. It was one of the Thompson girls, 8 years old, on a horse too big for her tears streaming down her face. Miss McKenna, Miss McKenna! Sarah ran out in her nightdress, catching the girl as she half fell from the saddle. Easy, child, easy. What's happened? The girl could barely speak through her sobs. They took him. They took Jake. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Took who, Jake Pritchard? From Doc Wheeler's, this morning, 6 men. They left a note. Doc Wheeler arrived minutes later, his face ashen, carrying a piece of paper. Sarah read it once. Then again, the words didn't change. Blackstone ranch deed plus 500 gold, Midnight Devil's Canyon, widow comes alone, or boy dies. Sarah's hands didn't shake. They'd gone perfectly still. The same stillness that came before violence, before death. She looked up at the small crowd that had gathered. Nate, Eli, Doc Wheeler, Prudence, Reverend Matthews. They took a child. Her voice was flat, empty of emotion, which somehow made it more terrifying. Nate stepped forward. Miss Sarah, it's a trap. You know that. Of course it's a trap. They'll kill you and the boy both. They'll try. Eli was shaking his head. We need to get help. Wire the territorial marshal. Form a proper posse. That's 12 hours away. They gave us till midnight. 6 hours. Sarah turned and walked into her house. Came back 2 minutes later, fully dressed. Gun belt strapped around her waist. 2 Remington revolvers riding her hips. The sight made everyone go quiet. Because this wasn't Sarah McKenna, the widow. This was someone else. Something else. This was the silencer. Sarah looked at her small group of allies. Nate, get the horses ready. Doc, you're coming. You'll be needed after. Eli, you're deputizing yourself properly right now. Reverend, I need you to stay with the Thompson and Pritchard families. Prudence spread the word. By midnight, I need every able-bodied person in this town ready to ride. Prudence's eyes went wide. Sarah, you can't be thinking of bringing civilians into a gunfight. I'm not bringing civilians. I'm bringing citizens. There's a difference. She checked her revolvers one last time, spun the cylinders, smooth as water despite 15 years. Nate's voice was quiet. Miss Sarah, it's been 15 years. You sure your hands remember? Sarah looked at him. Then without warning, she drew both guns. The movement was impossibly fast. A blur of motion, both Remingtons cleared leather hammers, cocking barrels, leveling at 2 distant fence posts 100 feet away. The entire group froze. Sarah held the aim for 3 seconds, perfectly steady, then holstered the guns in a single fluid motion. My hands remember just fine, Nate. She turned to face them all. Now let's go teach these boys why they used to whisper my name in the dark. As they prepared to ride, Captain Josiah Thornton arrived on his old horse cane, strapped to the saddle rifle across his lap. Sarah looked up at him. Captain, you're 70 and lame. This isn't your fight. Thornton's blue eyes were hard as winter sky. And you're 52 and rusty. You need me. I'm not rusty. I'm aged, like good whiskey. The ghost of a smile touched his weathered face. Then let's pour you out one last time, daughter. The sun climbed higher as they gathered their small force. But Sarah's mind had already shifted into combat mode. The same clarity she'd felt 2 decades ago. Every sense heightened, every possibility calculated. They had 6 hours until midnight. 6 hours to save a 9-year-old boy. 6 hours to face the men who'd been terrorizing this territory. 6 hours until Sarah Donovan. The silencer stepped back into the light after 15 years of shadow, and Wade Garrett had no idea what was coming for him. Because he'd made the oldest mistake in the book. He'd underestimated the quiet widow tending roses. And that mistake would cost him everything. The canyon called Devil's Gap sat 12 miles northeast of Blackstone, a jagged wound in the earth where wind howled through stone teeth and shadows pooled deep even at noon. 3 approaches led into the narrow valley. The main entrance from the south wide enough for wagons. An eastern ridge that overlooked the canyon floor from 60 feet up. And a collapsed western tunnel remnant of an abandoned mine that most folks had forgotten existed. Sarah McKenna had explored every inch of this territory in her 7 years here, had ridden these trails with George back when he was alive, back before his heart gave out in his study one quiet evening, or so everyone believed. Now as she rode toward Devil's Gap with her small group, Sarah's mind turned over that night 7 years ago. George had been 50, healthy, strong. They'd had dinner together. He'd mentioned Ezra Blackwood again, said the man was getting insistent about buying the ranch. Offered me twice what it's worth, George had said, but this land isn't for sale. Told him so plain. 2 hours later, George was dead. Doc Wheeler had called it heart attack, natural causes, and Sarah, still hiding from her past, still trying to be just a widow and nothing more, had accepted it. But now riding toward a fight with Blackwood's hired guns, she wondered. Foxglove grew wild in these mountains. Digitalis, it was called by doctors, caused heart symptoms. Could kill slowly if administered in small doses over time. In George's evening whiskey, perhaps. Sarah pushed the thought aside. Focus on now. On the child who needed saving. Speculation about the past could wait. They stopped 2 miles from the canyon. Sarah dismounted and spread a map on a flat rock. The others gathered close. Listen carefully. We do this smart, or we all die. She pointed to the map. Main entrance here. That's where they'll expect me. Alone. Desperate widow trying to save a child. Her finger moved to the eastern ridge. Nate, Captain Thornton, you two take position here. High ground, clear sight lines into the canyon. You'll be our eyes and our cover fire if things go bad. Nate studied the terrain. That's a hard climb for the captain. Thornton's voice was dry as desert sand. I'll manage. Done harder climbs with worse wounds. Sarah's finger traced the western approach. Doc Wheeler, Deputy Eli. The old mine tunnel comes out here on the western wall. Collapsed entrance, but there's a gap big enough to crawl through. I scouted it 3 years back. Eli looked uncertain. You want us inside a collapsed mine shaft? I want you in position to flank if they try to ambush me, which they will. Doc Wheeler, who'd seen his share of frontier violence, nodded grimly. What about you, Sarah? I ride in alone. Make them think they've won. Give them a chance to release Jake and walk away. Reverend Matthews, who'd insisted on riding out despite Sarah's protest, spoke up. And if they don't take that chance, Sarah's blue eyes were cold as January ice. Then I stopped being merciful. She looked at each of them in turn. This is important. Captain Thornton taught me something 20 years ago. The best lawman never fires the first shot, but he always fires the last one. She pointed to the positions again. Nobody shoots unless I do. Nobody moves unless I signal. We give them every chance to do this peaceful. Nate's single eye narrowed. And when they don't, then we end it. Fast, clean, minimum casualties. Eli's young face was pale but determined. Miss McKenna, these are hardened outlaws. 6 guns against our 5. How do we win? Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Deputy, I've been outnumbered before. The trick isn't having more guns. It's having better position, better patience, and the willingness to do what your enemy thinks you won't. She rolled up the map. Move into position, stay hidden, stay quiet, and remember, we're not murderers. We're protectors. We offer mercy first, always. Thornton added quietly, but mercy refused becomes justice delivered. Sarah met her old captain's eyes. Exactly. They split up. Nate and Captain Thornton rode toward the eastern ridge, taking the long route to stay out of sight. Doc Wheeler and Eli headed west toward the collapsed mine. Sarah watched them go, then checked her revolvers one final time. The Remingtons felt right in her hands, like meeting an old friend after years apart. The weight that balanced the smooth action of the cylinders. Everything exactly as she remembered. She'd cleaned these guns 10,000 times. Drawn them in practice until the motion was faster than thought. Had killed 38 men with them, each death justified each life taken only after mercy was offered and refused. But that had been 2 decades ago, when she was young, fast, unburdened by the weight of all those ghosts. Now she was 52. Slower, yes, but wisdom had replaced speed. Patience had replaced recklessness, and something harder than youth had settled into her bones. The understanding that some men only spoke the language of violence, and that speaking it fluently didn't make you a monster as long as you spoke it last after every other word had failed. Sarah mounted her horse and rode toward Devil's Gap alone. The sun hung low now, painting the canyon walls in shades of amber and shadow. Midnight was 6 hours away, but Garrett's gang was already there. She could see the smoke from their fire, smell tobacco and whiskey on the wind. They were drinking, getting brave, congratulating themselves on how easy this would be. Sarah smiled grimly. Let them drink. Let them underestimate. It only made what came next simpler. She rode through the main entrance, slowly, hands visible, making no sudden moves. The canyon opened around her walls, rising on both sides, the floor rocky and uneven. 6 men waited in the center. Wade Garrett stood in front, thumbs hooked in his belt, that cold smile on his scarred face. Behind him, Silas Cord sharpened his knife on a whetstone. The Carson brothers flanked left and right with shotguns. Raul Vega leaned against a boulder, rolling a cigarette, and Kid Dalton, the sheriff's nephew, swayed drunk beside the fire. Tied to a post in the middle of the camp, 9-year-old Jake Pritchard sat crying quietly, trying to be brave. Sarah's heart clenched at the sight, but her face showed nothing. She stopped her horse 20 feet from Garrett. "I'm here. Let the boy go." Garrett's smile widened. "Well now, the widow rides alone, just like we asked. That's real cooperative of you, ma'am. I brought the deed and the gold." She held up a leather satchel. "Release Jake. Take what you want. This ends now." Garrett walked closer, studying her face. "You know what's funny? I've been asking around about you. Old-timers in the saloon, they tell interesting stories." Sarah's expression didn't change. "Old men tell a lot of stories. They tell one in particular, about a woman ranger, called her the Silencer. Fastest gun the Texas Rangers ever had. 38 confirmed kills before she vanished 15 years back." He stopped 5 feet away. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Sarah met his eyes. "I know lots of stories. Doesn't make them true." "See, that's what I thought too. Just legend. Campfire talk." Garrett reached into his coat and pulled out a faded wanted poster. "But then I found this in an old marshal's office down in Austin." He unfolded it. The poster showed a younger woman, 20-something, hard eyes, long, dark blonde hair, and the name Sarah Donovan, Texas Ranger, reward $500. The reward had been issued by the family of one of the outlaws she'd killed. Never collected because killing a ranger was suicide, but the poster had survived. Garrett held it up next to Sarah's face. "Older now, grayer, but those eyes, same eyes. So I'll ask you again, Mrs. McKenna. You wouldn't happen to be Sarah the Silencer Donovan, would you?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, cold and sharp as broken glass. "I was Sarah Donovan, long time ago, before I decided killing men like you wasn't worth the peace it took from my soul." Garrett's smile faltered slightly. "And now you've taken a child, which means I'm reconsidering my retirement." She tossed the satchel at his feet. "There's your deed, your gold. Take it. Let Jake go. Ride out of this territory and never come back." Garrett bent and opened the satchel, pulled out the deed, read it carefully. His expression darkened. The deed was made out to Wade Garrett, a transfer of ownership, signed and notarized. It was also a confession. The legal language clearly stated that Sarah McKenna was transferring ownership under duress, specifically naming Wade Garrett and his gang for kidnapping, arson, and murder. Any court in the territory would see it as evidence. Garrett looked up, fury replacing the smile. "You think I'm stupid, old woman? I think you're a coward who hides behind children. I think you're a thief and a murderer. And I think this is your last chance to ride away breathing." Garrett's hand dropped to his gun. "Last chance, you're surrounded. 6 guns against one old widow. You think you can take all of us?" Sarah's voice didn't change. Flat, empty, certain. "I know I can." Behind Garrett, Kid Dalton, drunk and furious, drew his revolver. "I'm sick of this uppity bitch. I'll show you what happens when you talk back." He aimed at Sarah. She moved. 20 years of rust fell away in an instant. Her right hand flashed to her hip. The Remington cleared leather faster than the eye could follow. The hammer cocked, the barrel leveled. One shot, the sound echoed off canyon walls like thunder. Kid Dalton screamed. His gun spun away his hand, bleeding from a shot that had hit the weapon's cylinder and sent it flying without touching flesh. Sarah's gun was back in its holster before the echo faded. The entire camp went absolutely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Garrett stared at where Kid Dalton clutched his bleeding hand, then at Sarah. His face had gone pale. "Impossible. You're not that fast. You can't be." Sarah's voice was quiet, deadly. "I'm exactly that fast. I'm just also smart enough not to use it unless I have to." From the eastern ridge, Captain Thornton's voice boomed down. "Wade Garrett, this is Captain Josiah Thornton, Texas Rangers. You're surrounded. Release the hostage and surrender your weapons." Garrett spun, looking up. Saw 2 rifles pointed down from the high ground. Saw the glint of sunlight on metal. His eyes darted west. Saw movement near the collapsed mine entrance. More guns. His face twisted with rage and fear. "You lying bitch, you said you'd come alone." Sarah's expression didn't change. "I came alone. My friends came for justice." She took a step forward. Her hand rested easy on her gun, but the threat was clear. "Here's how this ends, Garrett. You and your men drop your weapons. You untie Jake. You surrender peacefully. You get trials. You get lawyers. You get everything the law provides. And if we don't, then you die. Right here. Right now. And I'll sleep just fine tonight." The standoff stretched, tension thick enough to choke on. Silas Cord, the smartest of the gang, slowly raised his hands. "Boss, she ain't bluffing. That was the fastest draw I've ever seen. And we're in a kill box." The Carson brothers were looking around nervously, realizing their tactical situation. High ground on both sides. Nowhere to run. Caught in a perfect ambush. Garrett's jaw worked, pride warring with survival instinct. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "Well, well, this is quite the standoff." Everyone turned. From the main canyon entrance, a single rider approached. Older man, around 62. Silver hair, expensive suit despite the trail dust. Riding a beautiful black horse that probably cost more than most men made in a year. Behind him, 10 more riders. Professional guns, not drunken outlaws. Real hired killers with cold eyes and steady hands. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She knew that face, even 7 years older. Even silver-haired now instead of gray. Ezra Blackwood, the wealthy rancher, the man who'd wanted to buy her land, the man George had refused to sell to, the man who might have killed her husband. Blackwood rode closer, a pleasant smile on his aristocratic face. "Miss McKenna, or should I say Miss Donovan, or is it still Mrs. McKenna?" He shook his head. "So many names for one woman." Sarah's hand stayed on her gun. "Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood, if you please. I'm a civilized man." He gestured to the standoff. "This seems unnecessarily complicated. All this violence over a simple business transaction." His eyes traveled over the scene. Garrett and his gang. Sarah alone in the center. The rifles on the ridge. He smiled. "Gentlemen, secure the child. Disarm Mrs. McKenna and kill anyone who objects." His 10 professional guns drew their weapons, fanned out, surrounded the entire canyon in a practice formation that spoke of military training. Sarah's tactical advantage evaporated. Suddenly it was 15 guns against 5, with a child in the middle. From the ridge, Captain Thornton called down. "Blackwood, this is illegal detention. Stand down." Blackwood looked up, amused. "Captain Thornton still alive. Remarkable for a man your age. And with that old wound." He gestured to his own leg. "Must be painful climbing to that ridge." He turned back to Sarah. "Here's the situation. You're outnumbered 3-1. Your friends on the ridge can maybe kill 2-3 of my men before mine cut down that child. Your people in the mine shaft, same story." He spread his hands. "So let's be reasonable. You sign over the deed, properly this time. We let the boy go. Everyone walks away. Simple." Sarah's voice was ice. "You killed my husband." The words dropped like stones. Blackwood's smile never wavered. "I'm sorry, what was that?" "George, 7 years ago. Heart attack, they said. But you killed him, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. Blackwood studied her for a long moment. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Sarah, you always were smarter than people gave you credit for." He dismounted, walking closer. "Yes, I killed George McKenna. Foxglove. Digitalis, if you prefer the medical term, in his evening whiskey. Every night for 6 months. Slow, undetectable, perfect." The admission hit Sarah like a physical blow. 7 years of grief. 7 years of loneliness. 7 years of wondering. All because this man wanted land. Her hand trembled on her gun. Not from fear, from rage barely contained. Why? Because George owned 2,000 acres sitting directly on the future Northern Pacific Railroad route. Surveyed, approved, worth millions. And the stubborn fool refused to sell. Blackwood shrugged. "So I removed the obstacle. Thought a widow would be easier to persuade. But you're not easy, are you? Sarah, your Texas Ranger's stubborn." Sarah's voice came out barely above a whisper. "You killed the best man I ever knew for money. I killed an obstacle to progress for millions. There's a difference. Then this is personal, and it's justice." Sarah drew. Both Remingtons cleared leather in a blur of motion, hammers cocking, barrels leveling at Blackwood's chest. Every gun in the canyon turned toward her. Blackwood didn't flinch, just smiled. "Go ahead. Kill me. My men kill you and everyone on those ridges, including the child. Is that the justice you want?" Sarah held the aim, her hands steady as stone, trigger pressure building. One squeeze. That's all it would take, and the man who murdered George. But Jake Pritchard was crying softly behind her. 9 years old, already orphaned, about to watch more death. Captain Thornton's voice echoed in her memory. Every life you take takes a piece of you. Make sure it's worth it. Killing Blackwood wasn't worth Jake's life. Sarah lowered her guns. Slowly, fighting every instinct. Smart woman. Blackwood reached into his coat, pulled out a document. Now, this is a federal eminent domain authorization, signed by the railroad commissioner. Your land will be seized in 30 days regardless. He held it up. So you can sign voluntarily now, take compensation, save everyone's life. Or you can refuse, and I take it anyway. After burying you, Sarah stared at the document, saw the official seal, the signature. Then she smiled. The expression made Blackwood hesitate. Something amusing. Sarah holstered her guns, reached into her own coat, pulled out a telegram. Your authorization is interesting, Mr. Blackwood, but it's also fake. She held up the telegram. This is from Governor Austin Webb, sent 3 days ago. Your eminent domain request was denied. Furthermore, you're under federal investigation for bribing railroad officials. Blackwood's face went white. That's impossible. How did you? Captain Thornton has friends in high places. We sent telegrams the day Garrett's gang first showed up in Blackstone. Governor's been investigating your land grabs for months. Was just waiting for proof. She gestured to Garrett. Thanks to Mr. Garrett's excellent record keeping, we now have that proof. Along with his testimony, once we explain that cooperation might save him from hanging. Blackwood's pleasant mask cracked. Fury showed through. You scheming witch! I prefer legally prepared. My husband might have been trusting. I'm not. Blackwood's hand went to his gun. Then I'll take the land by force. Kill you all. Burn the evidence. You could try, Sarah's voice carried across the canyon. Or you could look around and realize you're the one in a trap. She raised her voice. Citizens of Blackstone, show yourselves. From the canyon walls behind rocks from hidden positions, 30 more people stood up. Townspeople, farmers, shopkeepers, every able-bodied man and woman in Blackstone. All armed, all angry, all done being terrorized. Prudence Ashford stood on a boulder with a shotgun. This is our territory, Blackwood, our homes. Reverend Matthews held a rifle with surprising ease. We're done letting you buy our law and burn our families. And then Sheriff Hank Dalton stepped forward, his badge gleaming, his face showing something Sarah hadn't seen before, shame and determination. Ezra Blackwood, Dalton's voice was steady. You're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, bribery, kidnapping, and about 15 other charges I'll think of on the way to jail. Dalton looked at Sarah, met her eyes. I've been a coward too long, Miss McKenna. Took your money, Blackwood. Looked the other way when good people burned. But I got a line, and you crossed it when you took that boy. He turned back to Blackwood. I'm still the law in this county, and I'm done being bought. Blackwood's professional guns looked around, saw 45 weapons pointed at them, realized the math. The lead gunman slowly raised his hands. We ain't dying for your gold, Blackwood. This wasn't part of the contract. One by one, the hired guns dropped their weapons and stepped away. Blackwood stood alone, surrounded, defeated. But pride wouldn't let him surrender. He lunged for Jake Pritchard, grabbed the boy, pulled a knife, held it to the child's throat. Nobody moves. I'm leaving with the boy. First person tries to stop me, he dies. Sarah's voice was steady, calm, almost gentle. Ezra, don't do this. Get back, all of you, or I swear to God, I'll cut his throat. He was backing toward the horses now, dragging Jake, knife pressed against the boy's neck. Sarah took a step forward. This is your last chance. Let him go. Face trial. There's still mercy available. Mercy from you, the woman who killed 38 men. 38 men who all refused mercy first, just like I'm offering you now. Go to hell! Blackwood reached the horses, started to mount, still holding Jake. The boy, terrified but brave, did exactly what Sarah had whispered to him earlier when no one was listening. He went completely limp, dead weight in Blackwood's grip. The older man stumbled. His knife hand wavered for just a second. Sarah drew and fired in one motion. The shot took Blackwood in the gun hand. The knife spun away. Jake dropped and rolled free. Blackwood screamed, clutching his bleeding hand. Sarah's gun was already holstered. Sheriff Dalton and Deputy Sutherland rushed forward, grabbed Blackwood, slammed him to the ground, manacled his hands. Jake ran to Sarah. She caught him, held him close. You're safe now. You're safe. The boy sobbed into her shoulder. All around the canyon, townspeople were securing the gang. Wade Garrett, Silas Cord, the Carsons, Raul Vega, Kid Dalton, all in chains, all defeated. Captain Thornton made his slow way down from the ridge, leaning on his cane. He approached Sarah where she knelt holding Jake. "You did good, daughter." Sarah looked up at him, tears in her eyes for the first time. "I wanted to kill him, Captain, when he admitted about George. I wanted to. But you didn't, because that's the difference between a killer and a protector. He murdered my husband, and he'll hang for it. Legal, public, justice, not revenge." Sarah stood still, holding Jake's hand. Around them, the town of Blackstone stood together, united, no longer afraid. Prudence Ashford walked over. "Sarah, the whole town knows now about who you were, who you are." Sarah nodded slowly. "I know, and we're grateful. You saved us, all of us." "I'm not a hero, Prudence. I'm just a woman who did what needed doing. That's what heroes are, dear." As the sun set over Devil's Gap, the prisoners were loaded onto horses for the ride back to town. Blackwood kept muttering about lawyers and connections and how this wasn't over. Sarah walked her horse beside Captain Thornton's. "He's right, you know. He has money. Lawyers. He might beat some of these charges." Thornton shook his head. "Not murder. Doc Wheeler can exhume George's body, test for foxglove, and with Garrett's gang testifying to save their own necks, plus 40 witnesses to his confession." The old captain smiled. "He'll hang. Might take time, but justice will come." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "It doesn't bring George back." "No, but it prevents the next murder, and that matters too." They rode in silence until Thornton spoke again. "You going to stay retired now, or has this brought you back?" Sarah looked at Jake riding with Doc Wheeler ahead of them, looked at the townspeople walking together, no longer scattered and afraid. "I'm not going back to rangering, if that's what you mean, but I'm not hiding anymore either." "What then? This territory needs protectors. People willing to stand. I can teach that. Show people how to defend themselves, how to organize, how to make law mean something even when the badge is bought." Thornton nodded slowly. "Your father would be proud." Sarah smiled sadly. "My father got killed for standing up to evil men. And so did my husband. Maybe I'm just slow to learn the family lesson. Or maybe you learned it exactly right. You stood, you didn't die, and you built something stronger than one gun. You built community." As they crested the hill overlooking Blackstone, Sarah saw lamps being lit in windows, saw families gathering, saw a town that had found its courage. And she realized Thornton was right. This wasn't about being the silencer anymore. Wasn't about how fast she could draw or how many men she'd killed. This was about something her younger self had never understood. That the strongest weapon wasn't a gun, it was people standing together, refusing to bow, choosing justice over fear. The telegram arrived 2 weeks later. Sarah read it twice, then walked to town to share the news. The federal judge was coming. Circuit Judge Harlan Stone, 65 years old, incorruptible, known for harsh sentences on the lawless. The trial would be held in Blackstone. Public, witnessed by the entire territory. Ezra Blackwood and Wade Garrett's gang would face justice. All of them. And mercy Sarah knew had been offered and refused. What came next was simply what came next. The last words of the telegram stuck with her as she walked home that evening. "Justice delayed is not justice denied. Governor Webb sends his regards. Trial set for October 15th. May God guide the verdict." Sarah folded the telegram carefully. 3 weeks until the trial. 3 weeks until the men who'd terrorized this territory faced their reckoning. 3 weeks until Ezra Blackwood answered for murdering George. She looked at the setting sun painting the mountains golden red, and for the first time in 7 years, Sarah McKenna felt something close to peace. Not because violence had won, but because law had prevailed, and that Captain Thornton had taught her long ago was the only victory worth having. October 15th arrived with autumn winds stripping leaves from the cottonwoods. The town of Blackstone had never seen such a gathering. Wagons lined both sides of the main street. Families camped in fields outside town. People had traveled from 3 territories to witness what would happen when Ezra Blackwood, a man who'd bought and sold law for 2 decades, finally faced justice he couldn't purchase. The trial was held in the church, the only building large enough to hold the crowd. Judge Harlan Stone presided from the pulpit, his black robes severe against the whitewashed walls. 65 years old, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen every variety of frontier evil. He'd sentenced 17 men to hang in his career. Each one deserved it. Sarah sat in the front row beside Captain Thornton. Behind her, the entire town packed the pews. Prudence Ashford, Doc Wheeler. Sheriff Ely Sutherland, wearing his badge with pride after Hank Dalton had stepped down to become a deputy, again accepting his demotion as penance. Young Jake Pritchard sat with the Thompson family who'd taken him in. Ezra Blackwood sat at the defendant's table in expensive clothes that couldn't hide the manacles on his wrists. Two lawyers flanked him, brought from Denver at enormous cost. Their suits probably cost more than most families made in a year. The charges were read: murder of George McKenna, conspiracy to commit murder in the deaths of the Pritchard and Henderson families, bribery of federal officials, kidnapping of a minor, land fraud, attempted murder. 23 counts total, any one of them could hang him. The prosecution went first. Territorial prosecutor named Samuel Cross, young but sharp. He laid out the case methodically, called witness after witness. Captain Thornton testified about the railroad bribery documents seized from Blackwood's safe, showed ledgers listing payments to officials, including the railroad commissioner, whose signature appeared on the fake eminent domain order. Doc Wheeler took the stand next, explained that he'd exhumed George McKenna's body 2 weeks prior, sent tissue samples to a chemist in Denver. The results had come back 3 days ago. Digitalis poisoning, Doc Wheeler said, his voice steady despite the murmur that ran through the courtroom. Consistent with long-term foxglove administration. Based on tissue concentration, I estimate Mr. McKenna was dosed regularly for approximately 6 months before his death. Blackwood's lawyer objected. Hearsay, the victim has been dead 7 years. Any number of factors could explain those results. Judge Stone looked at the lawyer over his spectacles. Overruled. The witness is a qualified physician. His testimony stands. Then came the moment Sarah had been dreading and needing in equal measure. The prosecution calls Sarah McKenna to the stand. She stood, walked to the witness chair, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Prosecutor Cross approached gently. Mrs. McKenna, please state your relationship to the deceased George McKenna. He was my husband. We were married in 1869. He died in 1870, what I believed at the time was a heart attack. And what is your professional background, ma'am? Sarah took a breath. This was it, the full truth, public and permanent. I served as a Texas Ranger from 1857 to 1862 under Captain Josiah Thornton. During that time, I was involved in 38 fatal encounters with outlaws, all ruled justified by territorial courts. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Stone banged his gavel. Order, I'll have order, or I'll clear this courtroom. The noise settled. Cross continued. And after your career as a ranger, I retired, changed my name slightly, came to Wyoming seeking peace, met George. We built a life together. Did George know about your past? Yes. I told him before we married. He accepted it, said everyone deserves a chance to leave violence behind. Sarah's voice caught slightly. He was the kindest man I ever knew. Cross nodded sympathetically, then his voice hardened. Mrs. McKenna, did the defendant Ezra Blackwood ever approach your husband about purchasing your ranch? Yes, multiple times over the year before George died. George refused every offer. And did you witness any conversation between them? Sarah closed her eyes, remembering. 2 months before George died, Blackwood came to our ranch. I was in the kitchen, heard them in the study. Blackwood's voice carried. He said, and I quote, Mr. McKenna, I'm offering you triple your land's value. This railroad is coming through whether you cooperate or not. It would be unfortunate if something happened to prevent you from enjoying your stubbornness. How did your husband respond? George told him to leave and never come back, said this land wasn't for sale at any price. Cross turned to face Blackwood, and 2 months later, George McKenna was dead. He let that hang in the air. Mrs. McKenna at Devil's Gap Canyon 3 weeks ago, did the defendant make any statements regarding your husband's death? Yes, he confessed, in front of 40 witnesses, said he'd killed George using foxglove in his evening whiskey. 6 months of slow poisoning, called it, and again I quote, perfect. Blackwood's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection, this is hearsay. Judge Stone looked at him. Were you present at Devil's Gap, counselor? No, Your Honor, but... Then sit down. 40 witnesses heard the confession. We'll be hearing from several of them. Overruled. The prosecution called more witnesses. Prudence Ashford testified about the threatening notice nailed to Sarah's door. Reverend Matthews described the burned homesteads. The Thompson family spoke through tears about losing everything. Then came the surprise testimony. Silas Cord took the stand. Garrett's second-in-command had made a deal. Full testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. Life in prison instead of the noose. He laid it all out, how Blackwood had hired them, gave them a list of properties to target, paid per family driven off, provided protection through Sheriff Dalton, even told them which homesteads to burn and in what order. He had it all planned. Silas said, his voice flat. Said the railroad route was worth millions. Said getting rid of a few stubborn settlers was just the cost of progress. Did Mr. Blackwood ever discuss George McKenna specifically? Yeah, said McKenna was the Keystone property. Once we got that ranch, the others would fall easy. Said he'd already taken care of McKenna personally years back. Laughed about it. Said the widow would be easier to scare off than the husband. Silas looked at Sarah. He was wrong about that. The defense tried to poke holes. Argued Silas was a convicted criminal seeking leniency. But the ledgers backed up everything he said. Dates, amounts, properties, all documented in Blackwood's own handwriting. The trial lasted 3 days. By the end, even Blackwood's expensive lawyers looked defeated. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood. Blackwood rose with his lawyers. On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of George McKenna, how do you find guilty? Sarah closed her eyes, felt Captain Thornton's hand on her shoulder. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the deaths of William and Margaret Pritchard, how do you find guilty? The verdicts continued. Guilty, guilty, guilty on every single count. Judge Stone banged his gavel. Ezra Blackwood, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers on 23 counts, including murder, conspiracy, bribery, and kidnapping. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence? Blackwood stood. His face was red with rage. This is a travesty. I'm a businessman. I built half this territory. That woman, he pointed at Sarah, is a killer, 38 men, and you're taking her word over mine. Judge Stone's expression didn't change. Mr. Blackwood, Sarah McKenna killed 38 men in the line of duty as a sworn officer of the law. Each killing was investigated. Each was ruled justified. She offered mercy first in every case. He leaned forward. You murdered George McKenna for profit. You terrorized families. You bought lawmen and officials. You refused every offer of mercy, and when finally caught, you took a child hostage. Stone picked up his gavel. The court sentences you to death by hanging for the murder of George McKenna. Additional sentences of life imprisonment on remaining counts to be served should the primary sentence be commuted. Execution to be carried out in 30 days. The gavel fell. Blackwood lunged across the table, screaming, I'll appeal, I have connections. Money, you can't do this to me. Deputies dragged him out, still shouting threats and curses. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Then slowly people began to stand, not cheering, not celebrating, just standing in acknowledgement that something important had happened. Justice delayed but not denied. After the crowd dispersed, Sarah stood outside the church. Captain Thornton joined her. How do you feel? Sarah was quiet for a long time. Empty, but at peace. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. I wanted to kill him, Captain. When he confessed about George, every instinct screamed to just end him right there. But you didn't, because a 9-year-old boy was watching, and because you taught me better. Thornton smiled. I taught you the rules. You learned the wisdom behind them. There's a difference. They watch the sun set over the mountains. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now you go home, you keep ranching, you teach the things worth teaching, and you let the law handle Blackwood. And if the governor grants clemency, then Blackwood lives in prison until he dies. Either way, he's finished. Sarah nodded slowly. Then something occurred to her. Captain, I want to make a request to the court. What kind of request? Mercy for Blackwood. Thornton stared at her. You're joking. I'm serious. I want to petition Judge Stone to recommend clemency, commute the death sentence to life imprisonment. Sarah, that man killed your husband. I know, but George believed in law, not revenge. If Blackwood can serve life, pay his debt without us becoming executioners, that honors George better than another death. Thornton studied her face for a long moment. You know the town won't understand. They want him to hang. I know, but I'm not asking what they want. I'm asking what's right. The old captain's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. You've become wiser than I ever was, daughter. Sarah met with Judge Stone the next morning in his temporary chambers at the hotel. She stated her case simply. Blackwood had been convicted legally. Justice was served. But adding another death, even a legal execution, didn't bring George back. It just created more death. Judge Stone listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Mrs. McKenna, what you're asking is remarkably compassionate for someone who suffered what you have. It's not compassion, Your Honor. It's justice. Killing Blackwood satisfies my anger. But letting him live with what he's done in a cell for decades? That's true punishment. The law prescribes death for murder. The law also allows for clemency. I'm asking you to recommend it to Governor Webb. Stone leaned back in his chair. I'll be honest with you. I've sentenced 17 men to hang. Never lost sleep over a single one. But I've also never had a victim's widow ask for mercy. He picked up his pen. I'll write to the governor. Explain your request. But the decision is his, not mine. That's all I ask. Thank you, Your Honor. The governor's response came 10 days later. Sarah read the telegram twice, then folded it carefully. Request for clemency denied. Some crimes demand ultimate penalty. Murder of spouse for profit among them. Execution stands. Governor Austin Webb. She showed it to Captain Thornton that evening over coffee. He read it and nodded. You made the offer. That's what matters. You proved you're not driven by revenge. But he still hangs. Yes, because that's what the law demands. And you more than anyone understand the importance of law. The execution was set for November 10th. Public as frontier executions always were. A reminder that justice, however delayed, would come. Sarah attended. Not out of desire for vengeance, but out of duty. George deserved a witness, someone to stand for him in this final moment. The gallows had been built in the town square. A crowd gathered, somber and quiet. This wasn't entertainment. This was necessity. Blackwood was led out in chains. His expensive clothes were gone. He wore simple prison gray. His silver hair was disheveled. His face had aged years in the past month. Reverend Matthews stood beside him, offering final prayers. The hangman asked if he had any last words. Blackwood looked out at the crowd. His eyes found Sarah. Sarah McKenna, you think you've won, but you're still alone, still a widow, still haunted by ghosts. Sarah met his gaze steadily. No, Ezra, I'm surrounded by community. I have peace. You have a rope. Something broke in his expression then, the last of his arrogance crumbling. I wasted my life, he said quietly. Chasing money, power, and for what? This, he looked at Reverend Matthews. Was there another way? Could I have chosen different? Matthews nodded gently. There's always another way. Until there isn't. You had 1,000 chances to choose mercy. You refused them all. Blackwood's voice was barely a whisper. Then may God have mercy on my soul. Because I suspect no one else will. The hood was placed over his head. The noose tightened. Sarah looked away as the trapdoor opened, heard the sound, the gasp from the crowd. Then silence. It was done. Ezra Blackwood, who'd killed for profit and terrorized a territory, was dead. Not by Sarah's hand, not by revenge, but by law. Public, witnessed, just. Captain Thornton stood beside her as the crowd dispersed. How do you feel? Sarah took a long breath. Like a chapter closed. Not happy, not satisfied. Just finished. That's because justice isn't supposed to feel good. It's supposed to feel necessary. They walked back to Sarah's horse together. What now? Thornton asked. Now I go home. I keep the promise I made to George. I live the peaceful life we planned together. In the town, they'll want you to be their protector, their guardian. Sarah smiled sadly. I'm not their guardian. I'm their teacher. I'll show them how to protect themselves, how to organize, how to make law mean something even when the badge is bought. But I won't be the silencer anymore. What will you be? Just Sarah, a rancher who knows how to shoot. Nothing more, nothing less. The years proved her words true. Sarah never wore a gun in town again, kept the Remingtons locked in their trunk. But every Sunday she taught defensive tactics to anyone who wanted to learn, men and women both. Not how to be gunfighters, how to be citizens who could defend their community when law failed. Sheriff Eli Sutherland learned more than shooting. He learned investigation, evidence gathering, how to build cases that would stand in court. By 1880, Blackstone had one of the lowest crime rates in the territory. The railroad came through in 1882, legally, with fair compensation. The Northern Pacific paid Sarah triple value for a 100-acre easement. She used the money to build a school. Named it the George McKenna Academy. Jake Pritchard grew up on Sarah's ranch. She never formally adopted him, but he called her Aunt Sarah and worked the land alongside Nate Abernathy. By 1890, when he was 21, Jake had become foreman. Captain Thornton passed away in 1896. 89 years old in his sleep peacefully. Sarah delivered the eulogy. This man taught me that peace isn't the absence of violence, she said to the gathered crowd. It's the presence of justice. He taught me that mercy offered and refused becomes justice delivered. And he taught me that the strongest thing a person can do is choose not to kill when they have the power to. She looked at the coffin draped in the Texas Ranger flag. I've lived by those lessons for 34 years, built a community on them, and I'll die with them still true. In 1895, three young outlaws rode into Blackstone, early 20s full of bravado. They'd heard stories about rich ranches and absent law. They rode up to Sarah's ranch house. She was 70 years old by then, white-haired, weathered by time and sun, working in her rose garden. The leader dismounted with a swagger. "Hand over the ranch, old woman. We're the Dawson gang. This is our territory now." Sarah looked up from her roses, smiled. "Men like you have tried before." The outlaw laughed. "Yeah, what happened to them? They're dead in prison or got smart and rode away. Your choice which you prefer." From behind every building, from the barn, from the bunkhouse, 40 armed citizens stepped into view. Jake Pritchard with a rifle, Sheriff Sutherland with his badge gleaming, townspeople who'd learned from Sarah's Sunday lessons. Sarah stood brushing dirt from her hands. "See, boys, when I was young, I fought alone. Now I taught a whole town to protect itself. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and outsmarted. Last chance, right away." The three outlaws looked at each other, looked at the 40 guns, made the smart choice. They rode out fast and never came back. Sarah watched them go, then returned to her roses. Jake walked over smiling. "You didn't even reach for a gun." "Didn't need to. That's the point. We're not warriors anymore. We're just ready if we must be." Sarah McKenna lived to 89 years old. Died peacefully in 1914 in the same house where George had died 44 years earlier. But this time she wasn't alone. Jake and his family surrounded her. Sheriff Sutherland, now 70 and retired, sat beside her bed. Half the town waited outside. Her last words were to Jake. "The guns in the trunk, the Remingtons." "Yes, Aunt Sarah. Melt them down." Jake's eyes widened. "But they're part of history. Your legacy." Sarah smiled weakly. "My legacy isn't guns. It's you, this town, community choosing justice over fear. That's what survives." She closed her eyes. "Peace isn't the absence of warriors. It's warriors choosing peace. Remember that." Those were the last words Sarah McKenna spoke. They buried her beside George in the cemetery overlooking the valley. The headstone was simple. Sarah Donovan McKenna, 1826 to 1914. The silencer, she showed us that mercy and strength aren't opposites. At the funeral, Sheriff Sutherland spoke to the gathered crowd. "Sarah McKenna killed 38 men in her youth, all justified, all after offering mercy. But that's not what made her great." He looked at the faces around him. 3 generations, all living in a territory transformed. What made her great was the 39 years she spent not killing. Teaching instead, building instead, choosing peace when she had the power for war. He gestured to the town below. Blackstone, Wyoming has the lowest crime rate in 5 territories. Not because we're the fastest guns, because we're the strongest community. And that lesson came from her. As the crowd dispersed, a young journalist from Denver approached Jake Pritchard. "Mr. Pritchard, I'm writing a story about Sarah McKenna, the legend of the silencer. Can you tell me what she was really like?" Jake thought for a long moment. "She was the woman who saved my life when I was 9. Taught me to read, taught me to ranch, taught me that strength and kindness aren't opposites." He looked at the journalist. "You want to write about her 38 kills, fine. But that's not the story. The story is the thousands of lives she saved by teaching a territory to protect itself, by showing us that law matters, that community matters, that choosing peace takes more courage than choosing violence." The journalist scribbled notes. "And the guns, the famous Remingtons. What happened to them?" Jake smiled. "She asked me to melt them down, so I did. Use the metal to make a bell for the school she built. That seems wasteful. Those guns were historic." "No, those guns were tools, and she taught us to build, not destroy." He looked at the grave. "Every day at noon that bell rings, calls kids to learning, calls the town to remember what matters. That's her legacy, not dead outlaws, living communities." The journalist left with his story. Got it published in newspapers across the country. But like Sarah predicted, he got it wrong. Focused on the violence, the gunfights, the legend. Missed the truth entirely. That Sarah McKenna's greatest victory wasn't the 38 men she killed. It was the war she chose not to fight, the violence she chose not to perpetuate, the peace she built from wisdom and sacrifice. Years later, the town placed a statue in the square. Not of Sarah with guns drawn, but of Sarah teaching a child to read. One hand pointing to a book, the other resting gently on the child's shoulder. The plaque beneath read, simply Sarah McKenna. She taught us that peace is not the absence of warriors, but warriors choosing peace. And in that small Wyoming town, in the shadow of that statue, generations grew up learning the lessons Sarah had spent her life teaching. That true strength isn't measured in bodies or battles. It's measured in communities protected, children educated, futures secured. And that legacy, unlike the flash of gunpowder, endures forever.